All right, breaking news tonight from the New York Times. The FBI opened an inquiry into whether President Trump was secretly working on behalf of Russia. That's the headline tonight. Here are the stunning opening lines of that report. In the days after President Trump fired James B. Comey as FBI director, law enforcement officials became so concerned by the president's behavior that they began investigating whether he had been working on behalf of Russia against American interests, according to former law enforcement officials and others familiar with the investigation. So what does that actually mean? Well, according to the New York Times, counterintelligence investigators had to consider whether Trump's own actions, quote, constituted a possible threat to national security. Agents also sought to determine whether Mr. Trump was knowingly working for Russia or had unwittingly fallen under Moscow's influence. The New York Times reports that Trump caught the attention of the FBI counterintelligence agents after this moment in the 2016 presidential election.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
But even after that, and other alarming incidents during the campaign, the Times says that, quote, law enforcement officials put off the decision to open the investigation until they had learned more, according to people familiar with their thinking. That all changed, apparently, with the firing of James Comey in May 2017 and two other actions that the president took around Comey's firing. According to the New York Times, the first action was, quote, a letter Mr. Trump wanted to send Mr. Comey about his firing, but never did, in which he mentioned the Russia investigation. In the letter, Mr. Trump thanked Mr. Comey for previously telling him he was not a subject of the FBI's Russia investigation. Now, the second event that troubled investigators was one we all watched. It was this interview with NBC News' Lester Holt, which occurred 2 days after James Comey's firing. The president said this.
Regardless of recommendation, I was going to fire Comey, knowing there was no good time to do it. And in fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, you know, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story.
This Russia thing. Now the Times notes that special counsel Robert Mueller took over this inquiry into President Trump when he was appointed, just days after the FBI opened it, and it is unclear whether Mr. Mueller is still pursuing the counterintelligence matter. No evidence has emerged publicly that Donald Trump was secretly in contact with or took direction from the Russian government. Let's just be clear about that. But one final note that caught our eye in this bombshell New York Times report is that FBI officials felt that their decision to open a counterintelligence investigation was validated, quote, when a comment the president made to visiting Russian officials in the Oval Office shortly after he fired Mr. Comey was revealed days later. Quote, I just fired the head of the FBI. He was crazy, a real nut job. Mr. Trump said, according to a document summarizing the meeting, I faced great pressure because of Russia. That's taken off. That was an interesting meeting, if you recall. U.S. press was not allowed into that meeting. We heard about it afterward. James Comey is a nut job and a crazy guy, according to the President of the United States. Joining us now, David Corn, Washington Bureau Chief for Mother Jones, Glenn Kirschner, former federal prosecutor, both are MSNBC analysts, and joining us, Frank Montoya, retired FBI senior executive who served as the National Counterintelligence Executive. This, Frank, is a counterintelligence investigation. There's two kinds of investigations that the FBI does. Most of what we talk about are criminal investigations. Counterintelligence investigations serve a different purpose. What was this for?
Exactly that, to determine if there were intelligence activities that a foreign power was conducting, in this case Russia, against the United States, and that perhaps Americans of some sort, witting or unwitting, were enabling or helping or facilitating that interference or that intelligence collection.
Glenn, that's a high bar and a big decision for the FBI to make, to go after or to look into a president of the United States. In fact, according to the article, I want to read a little more from the article, there was a debate within the FBI. It says a vigorous debate has taken shape among some former law enforcement officials outside the case over whether FBI investigators overreacted in opening the counterintelligence inquiry during a tumultuous period at the Justice Department. Other former officials noted that those critics were not privy to all the evidence and argued that sitting on it would have been an abdication of duty. For the FBI to decide after the firing of James Comey that this sort of investigation was necessary meant there must have been enough evidence for them to want to go forward with it.
Yeah, Ali, and I think we should all be heartened that the counterintelligence investigation was up and running because, you know, for the last couple of years, we've seen what, at least to my eyes as a former career prosecutor, to be collusion with Russia in plain sight. I mean, we have a president who, at best, has this strange affinity for Putin and for Russian positions, and at worst has been conspiring and even doing Russia's bidding all along to the detriment of America. And, you know, you had a great run-up of everything that demonstrates that. One other thing I would add, Ali, is, you know, when James Comey and Clapper and some others gave the president and his team, after he'd been elected, the first national security briefing and told them, you know, Mr. President-elect, Russia hacked and interfered in our elections, the president-elect didn't ask, oh, my goodness, how does this happen? How do we hold them accountable? How do we prevent it from happening again? What did he do, according to former Director Comey? He immediately started to say, how can we spin this so it's not a public relations disaster? That should have told us something right there. He had none of the normal
curiosity that someone would have when told that a foreign entity may have interfered in our elections. David Corn, as Glenn said, some of this happened in plain sight, right? The conversation with Lester Holt, that weird meeting at the White House with the Russian foreign minister and the Russian ambassador to the United States, in which Americans were not allowed in. That press conference in Helsinki next to Vladimir Putin, which no one could understand. But some of it didn't happen in plain sight, like the Trump Tower meeting, like the idea that Donald Trump warned America that emails were going to be released, and then suddenly emails were released. Put this all in context for us.
Let's take it to the campaign itself. During the campaign, after it came out, it was publicly reported that Russia was attacking the DNC, and then it was clear that the hacked material was being released at the Democratic Convention, and afterwards it hurt the DNC. Donald Trump and Paul Manafort and Donald Trump Jr. and others related to the campaign again and again reiterated, they repeated, they echoed the Russian propaganda, the Russian disinformation, that they had nothing to do with this. This is where the real collusion in plain sight is. Even after Donald Trump in mid-August 2016 received a private intelligence briefing and was told then by the U.S. intelligence community that the Russians were behind these attacks, he came out publicly and repeated what Vladimir Putin was saying, that Russia had nothing to do with this, and he did that throughout the campaign, and even after the U.S. government made it official publicly that they believed Russia was behind this. So there's collusion in the cover-up, and you have the Trump Tower meeting, and you have time and time again where Donald Trump himself or someone associated with the campaign is sending a signal to Moscow, we want to work with you, we're on your side, we're going to protect you. If people charge you with intervening in the election, we're open for business, we want to deal with you. And I know throughout the 2016 campaign, counterintelligence people and people in the national security world were aghast. They were wondering what's going on with this guy and wondered if there was something else other than what was obvious.
Frank, let me read you the response from the White House. Sarah Huckabee Sanders has given us a response in which she said, this is absurd. James Comey was fired because he was a disgraced partisan hack, and his deputy, Andrew McCabe, who was in charge at the time, is a known liar fired by the FBI. Unlike President Obama, who let Russia and other foreign adversaries push America around, President Trump has actually been tough on Russia. The second part is its own thing, but the first part, the consistent attack on the FBI, on law enforcement in general at a federal level, but on the FBI, the idea that it is populated with hacks, that it's a witch hunt, this is the president's response to everything that the FBI has said or done.
Well, and it's totally irrelevant whether it comes from him or it comes from any of his spokespeople, because, as David said, it's about his actions. They speak for themselves. In terms of the initiation of an investigation, it's all based on the suspicions that the FBI had about his behavior. You know, I noted that in typical counterintelligence investigations, it's about determining if a foreign power is collecting intelligence against us, and if Americans wittingly or unwittingly are enabling or facilitating that collection. In this case, I mean, it seemed loud and clear beyond, the suspicions even, that there was something that was there, and we were compelled, or the FBI was compelled in those instances, to conduct an investigation to determine if it was unwitting or witting. The fact that there was just so much of the activities that were out there, whether it was meetings by individuals associated with him, closely associated with him, or his own behaviors. And it was before and after Jim Comey's dismissal. So in terms of the counterintelligence investigation itself, really relevant that it was conducted because of all of the suspicious behavior.
And Glenn, obviously the FBI, before and after Comey's departure, was concerned about how this would look. According to the New York Times report, as for a counterintelligence inquiry, law enforcement officials concluded they would need strong evidence to take the sensitive step of investigating the president. And they were also concerned, this is interesting, also concerned that the existence of such an inquiry could be leaked to the news media, undermining the entire investigation into Russia's meddling in the election. So that has come to pass. The news media now knows that there was an investigation. The president has given us exactly the response that we would have expected to such a thing, once again choosing not to take the matter seriously of Russian interference into the election, but to somehow design this as a witch hunt with partisan hacks. But this is important to me because the FBI must have thought about this and thought about it and thought about it 5 more times before moving ahead.
Yeah, there is no more sort of dramatic and perhaps even unprecedented step than for the FBI to open a counterintelligence investigation into a presidential candidate or a sitting president. But I can tell you, declining to do it would have been irresponsible, and it ultimately would have been dangerous. We in law enforcement, when I was a federal prosecutor, I had people attacking me all the time for prosecutorial decisions I made. And, we can't decline to do the right thing for fear of reaction by the wrong people or by the complicit people. So I think the FBI did the right thing, the necessary thing, and you know what? Let the criticism come.
Yep, and that's an interesting point you make, Glenn, and I want to ask you about this, Frank. I want to ask David about this. I mean, the article is a remarkable read. It's full of detail. Michael Schmidt, one of the authors of it, said that they've really been working on it for a year and a half because they've had bits and pieces of this information for a year and a half. But here's something that it says. It says, as the FBI officials debated whether to open the investigation, some of them pushed to move quickly before Mr. Trump appointed a director who might slow down or even end their investigation into Russian interference. Here's the key sentence to me. Many involved in the case viewed Russia as the chief threat to American democratic values. And David, ultimately, that's what this comes down to.
Yes. We use the word meddling, interference, intervention. Russia attacked American democracy in the 2016 campaign. They attacked it with social media. They attacked it by hacks and releasing material that arguably had an impact on the election itself. They did so to disrupt and cause American democracy to look messy. And at some point, they also decided helping Trump would be part of their aims as well. So this was information warfare. This is the most serious matter that one can think of because it attacks the foundation of our society. And yet Donald Trump has never come to terms with this. The Republican Party in general has not had a reckoning and realized that this was a monumental act. And I think what we've seen is one of the biggest scandals in the history of America. Yet we get distracted. We talk about Donald Trump's tweets. And so I can only imagine what it was like inside the FBI all this time when they worried about the Russian attack and any interactions between the Trump crowd and the adversary that was attacking a U.S. election.
Gentlemen, I thank you for helping me kick off this hour in such a meaningful way. Your analysis is indispensable. David Corn is the Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones and the co-author of a remarkable book called Russian Roulette. Glenn Kirschner is a former federal prosecutor. Frank Montoya is a retired FBI senior executive who served in counterintelligence.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.